It's unbelievable to think that we are now at war, and by we, I mean the world. On Saturday, the 28th of February, Israel, together with the US, launched a joint attack on Iran. Israel fired the first missile, which hit Tehran, the capital, at around 10 a.m., but within an hour, Trump, so the president of the US, had confirmed that the US was joining Israel in this attack. So they were also launching airstrikes at Iran, meaning that it was not a defensive move. They launched the attack. It was a preemptive strike. They, in a nutshell, were the ones who declared war on Iran. Like a lot of people, when I heard about it, the first thing I thought was that it was inevitable. And by inevitable, I don't mean right, and I also don't mean unavoidable. I don't think that this war was unavoidable, but I do think it was inevitable. And what I mean by that is an attack on another country, especially a coordinated attack. So in this case, Israel and the US together launched an airstrike on Iran. That does not come out of nowhere, that does not happen by accident. An attack like that only comes about as a result of a lot of coordination and a lot of planning, long-term planning as well as short-term maneuvering. I'm sure there would have been quite a few ad hoc decisions that would have been made for the very first missile strike, which came from Israel, for that to have landed and struck the regime's leader. So the Ayatollah Khomeini, for that to have struck and taken out the leader or the center, you could say, of power in an oppressive regime that they were trying to topple, that isn't luck. My guess is that the reason they launched this strike on Saturday at 10 a.m. is because they knew his coordinates and they knew that the success of that particular mission to take out the regime leader, that was almost a guarantee. That is what I suspect anyway. That whole thing, the strikes against Iran, the fact that the US and Israel have together declared war on another country, have declared war on Iran, almost with the blessing, you could say, of other nation states, of the allied states, that I think was foreseeable. What I don't want to hear now is all the speculation, the speculative opinions coming out of the US about what should happen now with Iran. What kind of regime should we put in place in this country now that their regime has toppled? The reason I don't want to hear those opinions, the reason why I think that type of discussion is so idiotic to have, is because look at the reason why the US decided to launch an airstrike. The reason for the attack, the reason why they are now at war with this country, is because the US declared war on Iran, not the other way around. The US started this war with Iran. Why? Because they had decided that the situation in Iran with this oppressive regime was now intolerable for the US. The people of Iran had already found life under that regime intolerable, and they had suffered for decades. Decades this had gone on, and the US chose not to intervene. What the US did instead was make the situation a lot worse by sanctioning this country. And the sanctions have led to such economic hardship in Iran that one rial, so one of their currency, is worth about 1.3 million US dollars. That's how bad the inflation had become. So people have not been able to afford electricity, water, basic essentials, food, ways to survive, not to mention the human rights violations that have been ongoing for decades. And in January, when this reached a climax, people were protesting on the street, protesting because they found their living conditions so intolerable. And what the government response was to cut off their internet. So the whole country had no internet, still has no internet. And what they did was they brutally punished them. They killed protesters for protesting the right to be able to buy water and food so that they might survive. When people were protesting, and when thousands of them, thousands were being killed, including children, when images that were being leaked out of the country were showing makeshift mass graves, and when the regime's leader, the Ayatollah, who is now dead, when he claimed responsibility for those deaths, meaning that that was, for him, a very reasonable punishment when people protest. That was the point that the US started making declarations or intentions of war and strikes against Iran. This was in January. This was about a month ago. So what prompted this attack, what prompted this war, was the mass protesting of the people of Iran, which resulted in their mass killing. It resulted in mass murders across the country because they were protesting their living conditions. So now that the Ayatollah has been taken out, there are a lot of questions around what will happen now in place of the regime. Now that the regime has hopefully fallen, what will take its place? The discussion now around whether it should be Israel or whether it should be the US who picks their next leader. The discussion around whether Iran should take on like a Westminster model of government similar to the UK, similar to the US, whether we should be trying to rebuild the political system in Iran after the American system, or whether we should be building it in America's interests, whether we should be rebuilding that country in a way that it now serves US's interest. The absolute absurdity of this type of thinking, all you have to do is remind yourself why the US declared war on Iran. The whole reason why the US launched an attack on Iran after decades of oppression in that country was because of the mass protests, because of thousands of protesters rejecting the authority of that country and the authority over their lives. When it comes to the question about what happens now in Iran, the only criteria for that should be the consensus of the people of Iran. What do the people of Iran want? What do they need? What they need is they need immediate relief from the hardships they've suffered, which have only escalated in the last few months and are probably still escalating now, seeing that the country is at war. They need relief from the suffering, from not having access to food, electricity, water. They need recovery from the economic hardship which has crippled their spending power and their country's spending power. Their country's GDP has been annihilated. There was plenty of illegal economic activity happening with that country, but because of the sanctions that were put on the government, they could not trade efficiently. And when they rebuild, the only way that that country will become a country that we don't then attack, that we don't launch another war on. The only way for that to happen is if people can accept their new form of government.